Okay, I guess we'll get started now. So we're in Daniel chapter 3. I think we'll be starting around verse 8. So what has happened so far in the book, we start out learning about Daniel and his three friends. They've been taken to Babylon. They go through a schooling process, and they would be about 18 years old or so during that first major story, which is chapter 2, where you have King Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, and he asks for somebody to interpret the dream, and so Daniel is able to interpret the dream in chapter 2. And as a result of that, Daniel is made second in command, basically. He is the ruler of the entire province of Babylon. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are basically right under him. So these four Jewish young men are promoted to some of the highest positions in the entire kingdom. I know last week Sarah asked me how large was the province of Babylon. I couldn't really find that. The city itself, though, is very large. They think probably about 200,000 people live just in the city itself. The province obviously would have been bigger than that, but the city named Babylon would have been the main city in the province. If you're wondering where it is today, it's about 50 miles south of Baghdad. So it's in Iraq, is where it's located. And there's still a lot of the ruins of it there. You can go visit it if you'd like. Anyway, so here in chapter 3, these events, it doesn't really say when this is, but it's probably still early in King Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So maybe within a few years of the chapter 2 events. If that's the case, then Daniel and his three friends would be maybe early 20s, something like that at this point. And so what we find out in the first part of the chapter that we talked about last week is that the king set up a statue probably about 15 miles outside of the city, and it's this large statue. Doesn't say what the statue is of exactly, other than it's made of gold, which means it's gold-plated. It's probably a statue of his favorite god, which is Marduk, but that's, speculation. And so what he does is he brings in all the political leaders from not just the province of Babylon, but from the entire kingdom. And he has them come in. And this is really a political test. It's a test to see if all these people will bow down before if you assume that the statue is of his favorite god, then he's asking them to bow down and worship the statue of his favorite god to show allegiance to him as the ruler of the kingdom. And that's really the point of all this, is it's a test to see, are these people going to submit to him or to King Nebuchadnezzar as the king? Remember, so this is probably early in his reign. He's still trying to make sure he has power, control of the kingdom. And so that's kind of what this is about. It's kind of a political test, a way to make sure that everybody is on the same page and everybody is submitting to him. These people would be coming from a lot of countries that he had conquered, so they would actually have religious allegiance to their own gods that they grew up with. But he's asking them to set that aside and worship his God and not really worship him as king, but acknowledge him as king and worship his God as their main God. And so that's kind of what this is about. So it's a test to make sure that everybody is basically allegiant to him. So kind of with that in mind, we'll pick up here in verse 8. So it says, so what has happened in the first part of the chapter is he takes all these people out to where the statue is built, again, maybe about 15 miles outside of the city. He unveils the statue, and then he has all these musicians set up to play music, and when the music starts, everybody's supposed to bow down and worship the statue. Just one quick offhand remark about music. Music has always been involved in false worship. Musicians, a lot of them know this and know how to manipulate you with music. I would just caution you to be very careful about the music you listen to. Some of it is intended to create thoughts and emotions in you that are not good. And so this is an example here where the music is intended to get you to do false worship. And so just something to kind of keep in mind in our everyday walk. Just be careful what you listen to and what you allow into your life, because it may be influencing you without you really realizing it. Anyway, so it's verse 8. So what has happened, what we've seen that's happened so far. The music starts, everybody's supposed to fall down and worship, but what we're going to find out now is that 3 individuals did not fall down and worship this statue. So starting in verse 8, it says, "Therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews." So the Chaldeans here, these are going to be some of those astrologers and so forth that we've been talking about all along. The New King James just uses the term accused. It says accused the Jews. The ESV says maliciously accused. What the Aramaic expression, it's an idiom in Aramaic, and what it literally means is, I can hear the thunder starting outside now. It says they ate the pieces of. And so we have a similar expression in English, to chew somebody out, or more colorful versions of that idiom that you can use in English that I won't say here, obviously. And so that's actually basically the same idiom that is being written here in Aramaic. This is not just a flippant accusation against somebody. They are angry, and they are intentionally trying to destroy the character of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so it mentions here that they accused the Jews, and that'll come up here again in a second, so I'll say more about that in a minute. So verse 9, it says, "They declared to the king Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever.'" That's your typical obsequious beginning to a conversation with a king where you suck up to him to start the conversation. And then it says, verse 10, "You, O king, have made a decree." So they're reminding him, you've made this decree. This is what the expectation is. And remember, the decree to fall down and worship this statue is a test of your allegiance to him as the king. So it says, "You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon." I'm sorry, I got 2 translations here and I'm reading out of the wrong one. I knew I would do that. All right, let me just flip to the New King James here. All right, so verse 10, "You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image." So one key thing to notice there is they are acknowledging that this is worship. That's what the Chaldean guys are saying, that this is a form of worship and that these people are supposed to be worshiping. So verse 11, it says, "And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." And then they go on and they say, "There are certain Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon." Let me just stop there. Why would it matter if they're Jews? Really, the issue here is you have 3 individuals that aren't worshiping his God. The fact that it keeps mentioning that they say that they're Jews suggests that there's a bit of anti-Semitism happening here, okay? So remember, these are the Chaldeans. These are the astrologers and that kind of thing. And if you remember, after in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar appointed Daniel over all these individuals. And so there's probably an element of animosity here where these people are jealous of Daniel and the other 3 because they're not native Babylonians, and because of the events of chapter 2, the king has appointed them over all of these other individuals. And they're jealous as a result of that, and they don't like that, okay? So some of these people are probably older than them. They have more experience. They're native Babylonians. They've been in the administration longer, and they kind of feel slighted by the fact that Daniel and the other 3 are over them. And so they're looking for a way to bring false accusations against them to get them out of their position because they don't like them, okay? And so they don't like them in part because they're Jewish. And so the other thing you'll notice here is that it says, they point out that you have set them over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So they have animosity towards these individuals and they don't like them, but they're blaming the king for doing this, okay? And it's their kind of shot at him to basically say, you know, they're disobeying you, and it's, by the way, it's your fault. You should never have appointed these 3 people or 4 people into the roles that they're in, and look what it's resulted in, okay? Your bad decision is resulting in them mocking you by not worshiping your God, okay? And so it's intended to be a slight at the king. Now, if you're the king and you're hearing this, how are you naturally going to react? Okay, so you're the most powerful person in the world, and you have these people under you accusing you of making bad decisions, and it's blowing up in your face. Well, you're going to get really angry about that, right? You're going to get angry at them for making the accusation. You're going to get angry at the ones who created the problem in the beginning by not falling down to worship, and then you're going to get angry at yourself for making the decision that led to all this in the first place. So he's going to get very angry about all this. But as we read on in verse 12 here, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, have not paid. So they're going to make 3 accusations here. So these 3, they have not paid due regard to you. In other words, it's basically another way of saying they're disregarding what your command is. They don't really care what you told them to do. They're going to do whatever they want, basically. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. So they're disregarding your orders. They're not going to serve your gods, and they're not going to obey the command you made to worship the God that you set up. All 3 of these accusations would be punishable by death, okay? And so these are very serious accusations, and as a result, the king is going to be very upset about this for a multitude of reasons. So as we move into verse 13, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and fury, so he's very angry about this situation, because again, remember, this is a test of your allegiance to him as the king. So how bad does that look as the king, that not the very person right under you, so Daniel is the one over the whole province, but these 3 are right under Daniel. So these are 3 of the top people in your entire administration, and they're just blatantly disregarding your command to fall down and worship you. And that's the whole point of this thing, is a test to see are people allegiant to you, and it appears on the surface that these 3 are not allegiant to you. Now let me stop and just say a word about why is Daniel not here, or why is he not mentioned? He's probably not mentioned in this chapter because he's not there, okay? So if you flip back to the end of chapter 2, the very last verse, this is when Daniel gets promoted and the other 3 get promoted. And the writer, which we assume is Daniel, makes this point at the last phrase of chapter 2. It says, Daniel sat in the gate of the king, or kind of another way of saying that is he ruled in the city. And so he didn't really go out into the province. That's what he appointed. Daniel appointed the other 3 to go out into the province and report back to him. But his job was to stay inside the city of Babylon itself and rule from there. And so he's probably giving you a hint there that the events of chapter 3 occurred. He's not mentioned because he's still sitting in the city and he didn't go out. So if the king and all the officials went out to this site to worship this idol, you need somebody to stay back in the city to make sure all the affairs of the city are running smoothly like normal. And that's probably where Daniel is. Daniel's probably still in the city of Babylon, and all the other people are out here at this site about 15 miles away doing this thing with this idol. So that's probably why Daniel doesn't appear anywhere in this chapter. Okay, so picking back up at verse 13. So it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and fury gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, notice how he starts. He says, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up. So what you notice here, a couple things. One, he knows their names, okay? So these are three of the top highest officials in his government. He knows them, he knows their names. The other thing is, you can tell he's disappointed by the way he says it. He says, is this true? Like, he doesn't want it to be true. He's hoping it's not true, but he's going to find out in a second that it is. But he's obviously very angry, but he's also hurt. And he's hoping that this is not the case, okay? And a couple other things. He's invested a lot of time and money into these three, so he's paid for them to go to school for 3 years, paid for all their expenses. He's now made them government officials, very high-ranking government officials. They're probably doing a very good job in the role that they're in. He doesn't want to just kill them, okay? This isn't somebody you just want to eliminate and then have to replace with somebody who's probably not as good as them, okay? So he's hoping this isn't true, and then he's going to offer them a second chance to make the situation right in his eyes, okay? And so if you look at verse 15, it says, now if you're ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made good. In other words, I'm going to give you a second chance here. If you do it this time, we'll forget all about the fact you didn't do it the first time. And that's a very unusual thing. You know, normally in this situation, the king would just kill them, okay? But he obviously likes these three individuals. He doesn't want to lose them, and so he's offering them a second chance. It's very odd that the king would strike up the band again just for three people, okay? Because all the other people have already done what he asked. He's giving them a second chance in front of everybody. I'm gonna tell the band to start again. You fall down and worship. We'll forget all this happened, all right? When you think about it, they have insulted him, not intentionally, but in his mind they have insulted him, and he's willing to overlook that if they do what he wants this time around, okay? So it indicates how much he actually likes them, and he doesn't really want this to happen. So as you read on there in the end of 15, it says, but if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And here's really the key of all this. It says, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands, okay? The implication there is, remember, all these people that are there, they're not all Babylonians. They don't all worship Marduk. They worship their own gods, and he knows full well who their God is, okay? He knows that their God is Yahweh. It is not Marduk. He saw that in the previous chapter when Daniel, who proclaimed to him he is a worshiper of Yahweh, and that Yahweh is the one who interpreted the dream. He knows who Yahweh is, okay? And so the king is making a challenge here. And he's basically saying, Yahweh's not going to save you. You know, if you don't listen to me, you're going to die, because Yahweh is not powerful enough to save you from me, okay? And he is basically saying, I am more powerful than Yahweh. Now, you would think he would have learned his lesson from chapter 2, that Yahweh is more powerful than him, but he hasn't really learned that lesson yet. So in the ancient Near East, and I think I mentioned this last week, if you conquer another country, then that means that your God is stronger than their God. And so since Nebuchadnezzar has gone around and conquered all these countries in the ancient Near East, in his mind, Marduk, his God, is stronger than Yahweh. And they also would often believe that your God did not have power outside of the border of your country. And so a lot of times they would go to war with the purpose of increasing the territory that their God could control. So in his mind, Yahweh is just a God that only has power inside the confines of the territory of Judah. And so Yahweh has no power in Babylon. so he has no power in Babylon, one, because it's outside of his jurisdiction, if you want to think about it from a legal perspective. But secondly, he has no power in Babylon because he has already been defeated by Marduk and Nebuchadnezzar. Now, chapter 2 told us that that is false because Yahweh was the one who interpreted the dream. So what's going to end up happening here in chapter 2, 3, and 4, we're going to have 3 consecutive events where Yahweh proclaims to Nebuchadnezzar that actually I am not defeated, I am stronger than your God, I am stronger than you, but we're seeing the second one of those right now, okay? So this verse here is a direct challenge to Yahweh, and it's King Nebuchadnezzar basically saying, I'm stronger than Yahweh, Marduk is stronger than Yahweh, and if I toss you into that fiery furnace, Yahweh ain't going to do a thing about it, okay? And that's basically what he's getting at. Yeah?
Do we know how much time has transpired past from the time that he interpreted the dream to now?
From chapter 2 to 3? No, it doesn't say, but so most people think, well, so chapter 2, it specifically says is the 3rd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, which the way they count years is confusing. The 3rd year could be anywhere from the 13th month up to the 23rd month of his reign. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We'll just say the 3rd year for simplicity, somewhere in the first 3 years. Then it doesn't say when chapter 3 occurred, but because of what is happening here with them setting up this statue and asking people to worship it, it suggests it's early in his reign, because he's testing the loyalty of everybody to him. But it would take enough time for him to, from chapter 2 to now, to build this statue and have all these people come in and so forth. So most people think it's probably a couple years later, maybe, something like that. So in chapter 2, Daniel would have been about 18 years old, and the other 3. In chapter 3, if you follow that logic, then Daniel and these 3, they're going to be around 20, early 20s, somewhere in there. And so they're still going to be very young. And Nebuchadnezzar's young too. He's not a very old guy at this point. Does that kind of answer the question, Randy? Yeah, it should be early on, is what most people think. Okay, sorry, so verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king. Now this first line is going to sound kind of insulting. It is. They don't mean it that way. So that it says, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. What they're really saying is, we understand what you're saying to us. We respect your thoughts, even though they don't agree with them. But they're basically saying, we've already made up our mind. You can threaten us with killing us. It isn't going to change our decision here. We're not falling down and worshiping your thing. We don't care if you strike the band back up. We're not going to do it. Okay, and that's what that first sentence means. Verse 17, it says, if that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to. And let me just stop there. So this is kind of a key component of their response. The phrase able to there in Aramaic, what it really means is, we know God is capable of saving us, but we also know God does not always miraculously intervene on behalf of his people, okay? So what they are saying is, you just told us Yahweh isn't going to do anything. He has no power to save us. We, on the other hand, know for a fact Yahweh has the power to save us, but he may choose not to do so, okay? And so what they're going to end up saying, which we'll read in a second, is whether he chooses to save us or not is not going to influence our decision. We're going to still do the right thing and do what Yahweh wants us to do, and whatever he decides to do in response to that is up to Yahweh, okay? So as you read this, verse 17, it says, if that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, meaning if Yahweh decides not to intervene, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So they're basically saying, we don't really care. We're going to do what Yahweh wants us to do, not what you want us to do. Now you can imagine where Nebuchadnezzar is going to be at this point, right? The rage level went from pretty high to extreme now, okay? Because he really liked them and he gave them a second chance, and he thinks he's kind of being magnanimous and going above and beyond what he needs to do as a king. And he's trying to save them, and they just flat out say, we're not doing it. So verse 19, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. So now he has ratcheted up how mad he is. And it says the expression on his face changed. So he went from being really mad, but still liking them and wanting them to be saved, to his expressions changed now, and now he's mad. Okay, he's real mad now. And so he's not backing down at this point. And so it says his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. That's probably just an idiom meaning get it as hot as it'll go, instead of a literal 7 times. Verse 20, it says, and he commanded certain mighty men of valor. And this expression occurs a lot in the Old Testament, particularly under King David. What he means is he took probably some of his best military people and had them come in and bind these Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why would he do that? Why does it matter? It may be that he's trying to prevent anybody from intervening to save them. So if you get your biggest, strongest guys to go up and, bind them, then nobody else is going to try to jump in and interfere and save them. He also may be trying to do a show of power against Yahweh, trying to intervene as well, okay? So it says, so certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. So what we know from this is that the 3 of them are bound, meaning their hands are going to be tied, maybe their feet are tied. So they're not going to be able to get away. All right, verse 21. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So they left all their clothes on them, probably to make the display more dramatic, okay, because their clothes are going to catch fire probably before they even hit the flames because it's so hot, so it just kind of makes them like a human firework, and so it would make the display even more spectacular. That's probably why they left them on. Verse 22, it says, therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the strong guys that he had to bind them, they didn't have time to take whatever precautions they really should to be that close to the heat, and they end up dying. But what it also tells us is that this isn't somehow a fluke that they survived the fiery furnace. The strong guys who don't even fall into the flames die from the heat, whereas obviously the 3 Jewish young men are going to survive. All right, verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the fiery furnace. So when they fall in, they're bound. Right, verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose in haste, saying to his counselors, so the furnace is probably, the shape of it probably has an opening in the top and then some way that you can see into it at the bottom. I'm not exactly sure the exact shape. And then there would be some kind of ramp or some way to get up to the top. And so once they fall in, the king and everybody can kind of see what's happening inside somehow. So that's kind of the design of it. So Nebuchadnezzar is going to say this to his counselors. Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. And then Nebuchadnezzar says, look, I see 4 men loose. So their bindings burned up in the fire. Okay, so however they were bound, those ropes or whatever burned up. But obviously their clothes and everything else was not harmed. So it says, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Now, I'm not going to get deep into the Son of God thing for lots of reasons. This is not the class on that. We would be here for weeks. But let me point out a couple things. The New King James does an unfortunate thing here and capitalizes the word son, which makes you immediately think he's talking about Jesus, okay? Now, there are theories that this is Jesus, what you call the pre-incarnate Christ. I'll just say maybe and leave it at that. But that is not what the Aramaic says. The Aramaic just says son of gods or son of the gods. So if you're looking at the New King James, hopefully yours has a footnote that says or a son of the gods, which is really the better translation. Okay, so who is this? Jewish tradition is this is an angel, possibly Gabriel. Some people think it's Christ. I'm not really going to get into that. But the one thing I will point out is who's making the statement? Nebuchadnezzar is the one saying this. Does Nebuchadnezzar have any knowledge of the Trinity or Jesus? No. Okay. So I would just caution you before you jump off into theories, who's making the statement and what does he even know about the subject? Okay. He would know what an angel is, which he's going to make some comments about that later. He knows about divine things and so forth. But to think that he has knowledge of the Trinity or Jesus is a little far-fetched unless somehow the Holy Spirit inspired him to say these words. And that would be about the only way that he would utter these words. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. So who is it? I'm not going to answer for sure. There are multiple possibilities, okay? If you want to just say for now, some kind of divine being that God sent, it's probably the safest way to look at it, an angel or whatever the case. Okay, verse 26 says, Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, so he gets up to it to where he can talk to them. He says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. So notice something very important. A few verses ago, Nebuchadnezzar just taunted Yahweh and said, Yahweh isn't going to do anything to save you guys. Yahweh doesn't have the power to save you from me. I'm so much greater than Yahweh. And now he just says that Yahweh is the Most High God, okay? As you read the end of this chapter, and we're probably going to get hit by the bell, ask yourself, why does his tone change about Yahweh, okay? And I'll read a little further, and I'll come back around to that. So it says, Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. So the fire had zero power on them. It didn't even change the smell of their clothes. All right, so verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel. And again, I don't know why the New King James capitalizes the word angel, but mine does have a footnote that says or angel, lowercase, which is probably the better. And it says, and delivered his servants who trusted in him. So notice he's pointing out that they trusted him in God instead of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, one thing to kind of notice, despite Nebuchadnezzar being as angry as he was, he still respected them for standing up for what they believed, especially in the face of thinking they might die, okay? So he respected that. He didn't respect the fact that he felt slighted, but he respected their sincerity and faithfulness towards their beliefs. So that part he respected. And so now he's kind of acknowledging that when he says that you trusted in him, your God. And it says, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. And Nebuchadnezzar here admits he was asking them to worship a god other than their God, okay? So that's something for us to kind of think about as we're out in the world and doing things. Are we sometimes asked to worship something that isn't God? And maybe we might Maybe it's something at work where they're asking us to do something that we don't really feel comfortable with, or participating in something we don't really feel comfortable with. And maybe in the back of our mind, we don't really think of it as worship. Maybe we're just thinking, well, I'm just being a good employee, or I'm showing faithfulness to whatever they're wanting me to do. I just caution you to be very careful. You might actually be creeping over into the area of false worship instead of what you might initially think you're doing, okay? All right, so verse 29 says, therefore I make a decree. So he's now going to make a decree that's going to go out to all the land, okay? So everybody is going to know about this event and what he has to now say about it. He says, therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. So why do you think he's making this proclamation? And the answer is there's a multitude of reasons. One, he is admitting that he just saw a miracle happen, okay? And that's the second bell, right? First bell? Oh, okay, good. All right, so he's admitting that he just saw a miracle, so he cannot deny what just happened. And everybody there saw it happen, okay? And so he's acknowledging a miracle took place, and the miracle was the result of Yahweh. And so he has to now acknowledge that Yahweh is not some weak little God confined to Judah. Yahweh actually has power throughout the whole world, including Babylon. Okay, so that is something he's having to acknowledge, whether he likes it or not. The other thing is Yahweh is proclaiming to him very loudly that you did not defeat Judah because I'm weak. You defeated Judah because I let you defeat Judah. Okay, and so that is a very different perspective than what Nebuchadnezzar thinks. He thinks he defeated them because he's so powerful and great, and his god Marduk is great. And Yahweh is saying that is not the case. You defeated them because I let you win, okay? But the other thing is he just insulted Yahweh, okay? If you go back to, I think it was verse 16 or whatever, he told the three of them, Yahweh ain't going to do anything about this. Yahweh cannot save you. Yahweh is not more powerful than me. And Yahweh just showed up and said, joke's on you. I'm way more powerful than you or your fake gods. So if you're Nebuchadnezzar, you're probably freaking out a little bit, because if Yahweh can do that and save them, and Yahweh just gave you a dream however many years ago that Daniel interpreted about the kingdom falling and all this stuff and all these events that are going to happen in the future. And now he's seen two here. Yahweh saves these three from Nebuchadnezzar by way of a miracle. Then what's to stop Yahweh from punishing Nebuchadnezzar? And so Nebuchadnezzar is essentially sucking up to Yahweh. Okay, he's trying to right the wrong here by proclaiming throughout the whole land, all of his country, and which is basically most of the known world at the time, that no one messes with Yahweh, no one talks bad about Yahweh, and if they do, they will be killed and their house turned into a dunghill, okay? And he's doing this as a way of making up for his mistake, hoping that Yahweh will not punish him or take the kingdom from him or bring some kind of calamity upon him. So, yes, he saw a miracle, but a lot of this is about saving himself as much as anything. I'll stop there for a second because I know the bell's going to ring. Does anybody have any comments or questions about chapter 3? Okay. If not, I'll start chapter 4, but we're not going to get far. All right, I didn't do the last verse. So the last verse of chapter 3. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So he promotes them after the events of this chapter. All right, so chapter 4, I'm just going to mention a few interesting things about the chapter. We won't really get too much into it. Chapter 4, it is an extremely unique chapter. It is the only chapter in the Bible written by a pagan. Okay? The entire chapter is presumably written by Nebuchadnezzar, the way it's worded. It appears to be something he wrote, and it was an edict that went out to all the nation. So if that's the case, it is the only chapter in the entire Bible that is written by a pagan, and that is pretty intriguing. The chapter, just to kind of tell you how it works, the first 3 verses and the last couple of verses are a doxology. What's a doxology? It's basically a proclamation of how great God is. And so you have this pagan king talking about how great Yahweh is. And what he does, Nebuchadnezzar starts the first, so this is all written after the fact, okay, after the events of chapter 4 happened. So what he does is he starts the chapter, he talks about how great God is. He ends the chapter by saying how great God is, and sandwiched in between that, he tells you the story about what happened to him that leads him to the conclusion about how great God is, okay? And so that's what he's doing here. And this ends up being the third encounter between Yahweh and Nebuchadnezzar. But we'll stop there for tonight. Does anybody have any comments or questions? All right. Well, I hope you have a good rest of the week.